Welcome to the Cyber Business Podcast, where we feature top founders and entrepreneurs and share their inspiring stories. Now, let's get started with the show.
Matthew Connor here, host of the Cyber Business Podcast, where we feature successful business leaders, top law firms, green energy companies, and more. I have Dr. Jeremy Weitz here of Rise 25, who's done thousands of interviews with successful entrepreneurs and CEOs, and we have flipped the script, and he'll be interviewing me today. Hey, Jeremy, welcome to the show.
I'm excited to chat, and we're going to be talking about all dark web all the time because I am fascinated by this. When you talk about it, this is the world you play in, but for the rest of us, we don't even realize what's out there. But I'll let you get into a little bit more about CyberLynx.
Alrighty. Okay. This episode is brought to you by CyberLynx. Speaking of CyberLynx, and CyberLynx, that's cyberlynx.com, is a complete technology solution provider that ensures your business not only has the most reliable and professional IT service, but also has the right cybersecurity solutions to ensure your business stays productive and safe. All right. And now back to our show. All right, Jeremy.
So now, what are you protecting people from?
Really, it's all cyber threats, and I know that sounds kind of funny, but really, there's cybercrime has become such a big thing, and so it's all the bad guys and bad stuff that happens on that comes through the internet, if you will, and even stuff that doesn't come through the internet. So we're protecting really small and medium businesses from threats.
And then, what type of clients and companies do you help?
We love law firms, but we help, all kinds of companies. Any company that has PCs, Macs, computers, they work in an office, they work, from home. We help them all. Yeah.
One thing I asked you to do, and I don't know what you're going to talk about exactly, but I am fascinated. You have a service where you actually do a dark web scan of someone's name, company, everything like that. So I wanted to actually have you walk through an example of an actual company. Now, I know you've redacted the information so people cannot identify it, but an actual scan, dark web scan that you did on a company. So we're actually going to walk through this. I know if you're interested in this for your company, if you're listening, I think they can check it out on your website at cyberlynx.com/darkweb.
Right.
Okay. So you can check that out. And I know that you mentioned for anyone listening to this, you do offer a discount on that. So contact Matt directly for that. What's the best email for them to email you at?
That would be Matt, M-A-T-T, at cyberlynx.com.
Yeah. So you could just email Matt and say, I heard about it through the podcast and I am interested and I would like the discount. So, and he can share with you. But I'm going to just share my screen for a second and we'll walk through an actual real life example. It's going to be pretty fascinating here. All right. So here we are. And we're at, this is cyberlynx.com and, you can check out everything. You check out other podcast episodes here and more about their company. But I have the dark web and this is redacted. So this is an actual company that you ran this on. I'm going to have you walk me through the scam that you did on this. And so talk to me about what we're seeing here first.
Yeah. So I guess basically what you got to realize is kind of what the dark web is. I mean, we're all familiar with the internet, because Google and everybody else has got that indexed and all the websites you can easily access. But the dark web is not indexed. And then that's really what makes it the dark web, right? Is that it's not indexed and you can't just access it by going to Google or some other search engine. You can't just get to it directly. And it's a huge wealth of information, and because it's not indexed and you access it basically anonymously, it lends itself to criminal activity. And one of the the real problems with the dark web is that with that criminal activity, they're selling people's identities, they're selling people's passwords, and it might wonder how your password gets out there. And that's one of the big reasons we run this scan for our clients, is that we want them to be aware that of what's out there so they can adjust and have it no longer be applicable. It's no longer a threat for them. So you might have signed up at, let's say, Target for an account online, and Target or Audi, and there've been so many really huge breaches where hundreds of millions of users' accounts were leaked. Facebook, so your email address and the password you used at that particular organization got compromised, and in that compromise, now that's in a database on the dark web, and that password is available in plain text for bad guys to use. So they'll then take that password and your email address or email addresses, and they'll then go and try to access your other accounts. It could be your email that they're trying to access. It could be your, some online resource that your company uses. You name it. A lot, and the reason they do that is because a lot of people reuse passwords, which they shouldn't do. But if you're not using a good password manager, and we're big supporters of and recommend Keeper Security. Keeper's great, super easy to use. And this way you don't have to remember 20 passwords or 50 passwords or 100 passwords. You remember one and use your finger, print to get into your password manager, and it just fills everything in for you automatically, creates crazy new passwords, makes it easy. But if you're not doing that, then you're probably reusing passwords, and that's where people get into trouble. So when Target or Audi gets breached, they put, those passwords are then become available on the dark web. And you'll see from this report, when we look for everything for that company, every email address that domain has, some of those passwords get revealed because they were part of a compromise. And that's really where the threat comes in. So if you scroll down a little bit, we can take a look and see, there were 44, kind of issues here. 11 passwords were exposed, 13 email addresses. And so that's really the big thing. The PII, personally identifiable information, things like your address, phone numbers, social security numbers. That's important to know what's out there. If your social security number is freely available on the dark web, you're going to want to know that, because that means that if that other information's available, and it's usually not too hard to get, whether on the dark web or paid service, then your credit report's at risk. And if you're running a company, that's going to be important to you. So knowing that that's a vulnerability affords you the opportunity to freeze your credit beforehand, and so that it doesn't become a problem, because, well, hackers have access to it. And the same with those passwords. So if you scrolled, and in this report, we explain why this is.
I want to go through this, Matt, for a second. I want to stick here for 1 second, which is passwords exposed, and talk about some best practices, right? So we'll walk through each of these sections for this example, but passwords exposed, there's 11, right? And, when you get in someone's account, there's even more information in there. Emails exposed, and then there's number of origins. These are documents. So
that's where the different places where those came from. So it came from 18 different sources, if you will.
Got it. And then the PII, this is just the personal information.
That's right.
Personal information. So talk about some best practices. You talked a little for each of these categories, I guess you could say. So passwords, right? You mentioned Keeper as a best practice. Any other best practices that you recommend as far as the password go?
Yeah, I mean, you've got to, you shouldn't be creating your own passwords. And the reason being is, even if you think you're creating, like, let's say it's got to be 8 characters and it's got to have a number and a special character. Great. You follow all those requirements. It takes about 6 minutes for that to be cracked, so that's not really an effective, password. And if you do random passwords like that, and you just kind of hit on the keyboard and it's randomly generated, and there are no words in there. It's just a bunch of crazy numbers, letters, characters, in no rhyme or reason for why they're together. Now you're talking. But now you've got to remember that. And
Normally,
that becomes
people
a real
don't do
problem.
that because they can't remember it.
That's exactly right. And so that's why they start to reuse passwords, and that's where it gets dangerous. So the password manager, having one is really, really important. You know, it's just, and it simplifies your life. Right now, if you're managing those passwords in your head or on a piece of paper, whatever, it's a pain in the butt. It just is. And so for what might be $1 or $2 a month, it's kind of a no-brainer to have that completely secure. You don't have to worry about it. It's on your phone, it's on your computer, and it fills in the passwords. You don't have to worry about it. And when it's time for a new password, it generates it. It's the burden that it alleviates is worth $1 or $2 a month. It's just, silly not to. So,
So you mentioned
and
Security. Any other resources as far as that goes that people use?
Keeper's great. There's a number of them out there. I mean, LastPass has taken a beating for a good, for good reason. They weren't really forthcoming in, when they had a breach, which led people to, distrust them. It's hard to find. Keeper's about the only one that we found that hasn't had a breach. They really focus on security. Even the open source ones out there, like Warrant, it's got issues as well. So as far as I'm concerned, Keeper's probably the only one. It's the only one we trust and use. Doesn't
I've
mean
heard
that it's
popular, like LastPass is popular among people, and 1Password I feel like is popular among people. So there's solutions out there, but
using one that using any is better than using none. So I don't care which one you use, as long as you're using one. But if you want the one that's probably the most secure and one of the easiest to use, I'd say Keeper's the way to go. But use something just so that you don't have to manage it. So,
and then, so email's exposed. Any best practices to mention with that category?
That's a tough one because, let's face it, we put our email out there a lot of times. I mean, if you have accounts that you don't want getting out there, then this is going to be important to know what's out there. So if somebody can go and quickly and easily find your email address and then start spamming you, and you don't want that, well, it's good to know that that's out there, because in due time, that's going to be coming, because this information is being sold to spammers, to hackers, to, you name it. So,
and when you're inside of someone's email, I know, like, I'm always paranoid about clicking on things. Any best practices when you're inside the email that you advise clients not to do?
Oh, sure. I mean, there's really, I think the thing that people have to realize is that cybersecurity is not a state. So you're not in the state of being cyber secure. That's not a thing. Cybersecurity is a process where you're constantly trying to stay ahead of and more secure than the cyber criminals. And so that changes constantly. And I'll give you a really good example. Multi-factor authentication. People think that does it. As long as I'm getting my text, then boom, I'm good. That means that nobody else can get it because I'm the only one with my phone. That is 100% not true. It is surprisingly easy to now clone what used to be only for the movies, and I would have said is kind of, it's not science fiction, but it was reserved for high level diplomats and the very wealthy, because going through and actually cloning somebody's SIM, which is what you see on the movies when they're like, oh, let's go, and they put their phone near the other and then they clone it, and now they get the text messages and emails, right? That was like, oh, that's just Hollywood. Turns out, I mean, yes, the way they make it happen, and like, getting through the firewall, I'm in. Okay, yeah, that's all Hollywood version of it. But,
I was watching Homeland. There's some truth to that. So
I know, right? Yeah. Oh, they're taking down satellites faster than I can hack into them. Okay. So yeah, there's a lot of that Hollywood stuff, but actually cloning a SIM is a thing. We had a client come to us. One of our clients, they were on. We had multi-factor authentication set up, the monitoring set up, everything. They were doing all the right things, except one of the people in the organization hadn't set up their authenticator app. They were using the multi-factor authentication via text message to get into their email, which you would think generally totally fine. However, turns out that same account gets logged into in Europe at like 3:00 in the morning, and we're like, that's not right. How is that even possible? We go and look into it. And like the only way that that's possible, because the client was like, well, I was asleep. I didn't even see this come in. I definitely didn't log into my account. They successfully logged in using that multi-factor authentication code. And that's how we found out that their SIM had been cloned. And I can just tell you, they were part of a 10-person firm. Yes, that firm has plenty of money at their resources, but this is not some high level, government official or billionaire. This was basically a regular person.
Good thing you were monitoring it.
It really was, because otherwise, then the damage gets done and it's too late. And so, I'd say best practices. In terms of email, you've got to be using multi-factor authentication, and you got to be using a multi-factor authentication app, not that text. I think that's just how it is now. You got to use the app.
I don't know if you've seen those commercials. There's these WhatsApp commercials lately, and whenever you're listening to this, I don't know how dated that will be, but have you seen them where they have like the guy comes to the counter to send something, and he's like, I'm just going to send it with this pigeon because, and the whole moral of the story was like, people can see your text messages, like you can view them. It's not secure, and they're touting that WhatsApp. And I don't know the validity of it or anything, but there's like WhatsApp is secure, and so they're like, everyone could read your text messages, essentially, is what they're saying.
That's hysterical.
Have you seen that?
No, I haven't seen it, but that's hysterical. That's a great, that's great.
So that's true.
And yeah,
what
that's 100% true. I mean, it's not quite that bad, but it's a great analogy, great visualization. And with your email, it's not quite the same. And, of course, your iMessage is encrypted kind of to the same extent that WhatsApp is, but that's a great commercial.
So what about the origin, this part? Is there any best practices when we're talking about this?
No,
piece?
That's just, so here's where it becomes interesting for the company owner. So, or management, I should say. So when your company's domain, when their email addresses come up on these, you may have let's say you've got a 50-person firm and you've got a problematic employee, right? And then through the dark web scan, we find out that this problematic employee was using their company email address and on their Ashley Madison account, right? So that now, why that's important is because it now gives you gives some teeth to this whole thing, because now they violated the company's terms and use policy for your email by using that on some private site that then got breached. So now you've got kind of cause for helping let go of your problematic employee. But outside of stuff like that, that's great. I mean, also the same goes for Target. If they're using their company accounts and the same passwords they're using at Target for non-official Target stuff, that's a problem. So the origins, I think, is important there for company owners. It's just good to know that, hey, wait, these are the places that have gotten hit where we were a part of. So you can make sure you've kind of seal that off and aren't using that same password, even at that same place. So like say Audi gets compromised, your password's there. You've got an Audi account, it's legit, but you didn't change your password. That means somebody's getting into your account. I don't know what you have in your Audi account, but somebody else can see it as well.
What about anything to mention with it says number of personal identifiable information exposed?
Yeah. So I think this is actually, when in terms of privacy, this is kind of where it's at. So you want to know what's known out there of you. I mean, once it gets to the dark web, it's hard to pull that back. There's a lot you can do on the web, in the regular internet side of things, the non-dark web side, to make sure that your PII is not exposed and out there to the world, and you have rights on to protect that. There are laws, and so if you just Google your name and let's say your address, and suddenly all kinds of stuff comes up, and you're on this directory and that directory with your home address, your phone number, your cell number, you can easily go and have those things removed. Dark web, not so much. That's why these breaches end up resulting in lawsuits where people end up making money because there's no getting that back. That exposure happened, and it's now pretty permanent because it's on the dark web.
All right. So we'll get into it. I just wanted you to break that down. You have some information on browser security, cache, password storage, installing apps.
Yeah, actually, that's an interesting one. Let me hit that real fast because everybody thinks, hey, look, if I just store it right here in Chrome, I'm going to be fine. I just have Chrome be my password manager. Okay. Those are cracked instantly. You basically are storing those in plain text. So that's not a secure place to store your password. So if somebody does get access to your computer somehow, some way in the background, whatever, every password that you have stored in your browser is 100% available to them, with or without your login, password. So that you want to move. Most password managers make it really, really easy to import all of those passwords and then clear those out of your browser because they're right there. It's easy pickings for anybody who's got access to your computer.
Yep. So now we have, when you did this, compromises. What are we looking at here?
So here you'll see the email address on the left, and then in the middle. So those are redacted passwords. You're only seeing the last three characters of the password, but we redact those because there's no reason. You should know what that ER1 and the 123 password is. There's no reason for us to send that out there in case somebody happens to see this. So,
but just to be clear,
to somebody,
when you're doing the report, you can fully see these passwords on the dark web, right?
Oh, yeah.
So like they're redacted. They don't show up to you redacted. They actually, you can view all, if you go on in the dark web, you can view this email and this password, and everyone on the dark web can see their passwords.
That's right.
That's pretty scary.
It is. And, especially given the statistics on people's reuse of passwords, it's ridiculous. I mean, if we were all smart, we would all be using a password manager. They would all be, generated by the password manager, and you'd never even know your passwords. But it's the overwhelming majority of people are managing their own passwords and reusing passwords, and they have relatively simple passwords. And so it just becomes it's such an easy way for the bad guys to gain access. And it may just, all they need is like the foot in the door in one area, and then they move laterally across networks and across logins and everything else. So once they get one piece of information, then they can use that to find more information and more information and more information. So you want to cut that off as much as possible. And passwords is a great way, to make that really difficult for them.
And then, so then we have the origin here. What's this? What are we looking at there?
Yeah. So like Evite, for instance, everybody knows that one. Evite had a compromise. I think maybe, so, and then all these combo lists, these are where they've been combined together in these massive lists. So it's out there in a just a huge combined database of 3.2 billion passwords. That's what that 3.2B stands for.
Wow.
So a lot of passwords in there, a lot of email addresses and passwords, and just all right there.
And the personal identifier, the PII disclosed, is just the information that people can see on the dark web for this particular email address?
That's right. Yep. And then where that came from, in that case, it's drivesure.com. Yeah.
I don't know if there's any ones you want to point out here specifically of what you would recommend, because I'm sure, when you do this scam with someone, you're doing all of this, but you're making specific recommendations based on these. Is there any one that we should pluck out within what we're looking at here?
If we scroll up just a little bit to that domain who is, this is a little bit of a tricky one. So you can do, so that just means that they used their email, this particular email address to register a domain name, which isn't necessarily bad. It's fine. You can have that be, anonymous if you want for a few extra dollars a month. I don't know that it's necessarily bad because you were punching that in and you knew that this was going to be public information. So, it's just something to be aware of, that, hey, this is out there in case you didn't, know. you probably did know. But then again, not everybody is really aware of it when they're just kind of creating their first domain name for the first time. And they were like, I don't know. I just went to GoDaddy. I filled in the information. I figured I'd save, $10 a year by not making it, by putting my information out there instead of it being, anonymous. And so that's what happens there.
Is
So
it
that's just
worth
kind of a pointing out
is
there.
it worth it to pay the extra money to be anonymous or not?
I think
You
it
think?
depends on your situation. I mean, if you're, if you're a company with a physical address and you kind of want to attach your physical address to that domain name, and you're like, hey, look, we're ABC Corp and we're at 1 Main Street, then there's nothing wrong with that. Just know that I would use my info@abccorp.com instead of my Matthew A. Connor at gmail.com or whatever. So I would do something like that. It's just more a matter of being aware of what's out there and how to use it. So, but if you're a small company, you're just launching and you're doing it out of your garage, you might not want your home address in that in that registration information.
So let's talk about this part.
Yeah. There's some interesting stats out there. What would you like to talk about?
So hackers want your data, and how do hackers get in?
Yeah.
What would be the best part to talk about?
I mean, I think everybody's pretty much aware of it. I think it's interesting that it's basically $30 for company login credentials. I think that's a fun little statistic. It's funny because I'm sure those things are going to change, and like prescription drug records. That's pretty crazy. And the ransom at the bottom. The interesting part is now the ransom. What that's really referring to is kind of how it was going about. Like it would cost them about $3,000 to ransom your company, but now what they've done is they've got ransomware as a service. So on the dark web, I just saw 2 weeks ago the most spectacular ad, like video ad for a ransomware as a service on the dark web. So many billions of dollars have flowed into the uh, you know into cybercrime, that they're now using very high end video production to advertise their criminal activity, criminal resources for a service. So you can do ransomware as a service where you're paying basically a couple $100 a month to have access to a platform that then lets you go and execute these ransomware. So it gives you the payload, the everything. So you just simply follow their instructions on your targets. You go and find these email addresses, send them out. Somebody clicks on it, boom, you're in. It costs you $200 a month to do it. Now that everything comes into the platform, you see it all managed, just like you're a legitimate company, but you're a criminal. And it's just wild. So now I'd say that 2,000 is down to or 3,000 is down to a couple $100 a month for ransomware as a service services.
Wow,
And
that's crazy.
It's wild the stuff they're doing. Yeah. And
Some
so
software, coders have gone to literally the dark side and use their skills to create companies for illegitimate purposes. So here's some things to look at, security breaches, and then, phishing scams. You have a couple things with public Wi-Fi.
oh yeah.
What about
Yeah.
that? You're in the airport or you're somewhere else. What do you should people be thinking about with public Wi-Fi?
Yeah, I think one of my favorite is if it's free, you're the product. That couldn't be more true, right? And so when it comes to your email, if you're getting free email, then all of your information is being used. So you want to be paying for anything you use. If you're out in the public and you have a cellular connection, use the hotspot on your phone to get your email on your laptop and use that. If not, spend a couple of dollars, for a VPN. There are plenty of good VPNs. You can, try them out. They fluctuate between who's the best. They're super cheap to get the app, install it, run it. This way, if you're out there, you can have a secure connection to the internet and you're not going to get, have all of your information. let me tell you why that's a problem. So everybody's like, well, I heard that you shouldn't use public Wi-Fi. The reason being, you can get this really cool little device, called a Pineapple, where you basically launch your own wireless access point that looks and acts and is called the same thing as that. Let's say it's Starbucks, or the airport's Wi-Fi. And anybody within range of that comes to you, and then it gets passed to the legitimate network connection. But they're the ones that are getting all that data. So you connect to them, they see everything that's happening, all your passwords, everything you type, all of it, it gets logged. So they get to know tons of stuff. They may even get access directly to your computer when you do connect, depending on how you're set up. So there's a lot of dangers there. And you never know if some kid, with a laptop and a Pineapple is doing this. And for them, it may be just for giggles. And then they stumble upon something really valuable or really personal, and it just doesn't matter when it was so easily avoidable. So that's my recommendation there. Use your hotspot on your phone, or pay a couple dollars for a VPN. I mean, some of them you can spend like $20 and get it for life. So it's kind of a no-brainer. There are plenty of good options out there. Choose one. So yeah, and then I also think it's really important to talk about that the weakest link in any organization are the people. So if you've got any sort of, you've hired a pretty decent IT, company that's giving you pretty decent cybersecurity, protection, your weakest link are the people. So, you can have the best, home defense network in the world, but if the kids are able to open the door and let the bad guy walk right in, and worst case scenario is your house is so big that you don't even know they let somebody in, and then 3 days later, they're like, hey, has anybody seen the plumber? I let him in 3 days ago. The plumber, there's been a plumber here for 3 days? Yeah, that's bad. So you want to have that 24/7 monitoring no matter what's going on. And you want to be educating people on, your people on how to stay safe and not to let the plumber in. And if they do, tell somebody that they did right away.
Yeah, first of all, thank you. I appreciate you sharing this, and you shared my information. It's super scary. What emails are out there, passwords are out there. It's just unsettling. So I encourage you, check out cyberlynx.com. If you're watching this, or if you're listening to it, there is a video portion. It's CyberLynx, LYNX.com. And then you can put in /dark web and get more information on the actual dark web scan that Matt does and his company does. So check that out. More episodes of the podcast. And Matt, thanks for having me.
Thanks for coming on. Pleasure.
Thanks for listening to the Cyber Business Podcast. We'll see you again next time, and be sure to click subscribe to get future episodes.